Continues the chapter reading of Alfred Goldberg's book, Pentagon 9/11. And this is a pretty good chapter here as it talks about keeping the building open. To keep the building going required a prodigious effort by the managers, engineers, and mechanics of the building management office. And let's continue here. The heating and refrigeration plant. Their leap into action immediately after the plane hit the Pentagon helped save lives and limit damage. At the Building Operations Command Center of the BOCC on the first floor in Wedge 1, usually 2 or 3 people kept watch around the clock, receiving maintenance calls from building occupants, monitoring the functioning of utility systems. On September 11th, Catherine Greenwell, answering calls and preparing work orders, sat at the control desk viewing multiple computer monitors that displayed data about heating, air conditioning, ventilation, steam, electricity, elevators, escalators, and fire alarms. The information appeared on huge high-definition color screens above and behind the desk on the wall to center. To the right of the large screens, 2 television sets displayed the weather channel, CNN. When CNN reported that an aircraft had crashed into the World Trade Center, Greenwell notified her supervisor, Assistant Building Manager Stephen Carter, in his office opposite the control panel. As they watched the second airliner hit the other tower, Carter realized that crashes were deliberate. He immediately ordered the lockdown of all mechanical and electrical rooms in the building to secure utilities against attack. Carter had issued this order previously, but only during security exercises. He notified key staff of the lockdown: Michael Bryant, the building manager, and John Irby, director of the Federal Facilities Division of the Washington Headquarters Service. He also telephoned the Pentagon's Defense Protective System and learned that the threat condition for the building remained at normal. Should it change, DPS would notify the center. WHS maintenance managers came immediately to the BOCC, anticipating a raised threat condition. They discussed additional procedures for securing the building utility systems, after which they returned to their offices. The plane smashed into the Pentagon minutes later. It destroyed part of Wedge 1, where the BOCC was located. Carter and Greenwell felt the impact and heard what the latter described as a throom. The 2 tried to comprehend the information rapidly displaying itself on screens as alarms beeped and data flashed. Greenwell saw the fire alarm system go berserk as the number of alarms incredibly climbed fast, 1 to 10, and then on to 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, relentlessly to 300 and higher. She knew that for each alarm, 2 smoke detectors had activated. From the hallway just outside the center, she clearly heard the public address system instructing everyone to evacuate the center. Judging that no danger immediately threatened the BOCC, Carter instructed Greenwell to continue answering phones while he went to investigate to keep in contact with them by radio. Because he served as the building management officer's representative to incident commanders, usually ranking officers from the Arlington County Fire Department, Carter asked her to let him know when the incident commander arrived at the location of the command post. In the center court, Carter received radio calls from Greenwell telling him of people trapped in Wedge 1. He ran to A&E Drive and entered Corridor 4, where he encountered dark, dense smoke, heat, and water from burst pipes pouring into the drive. Nevertheless, he joined in helping others flee the building. Returning to the drive, he entered Corridor 5, again assisting occupants to leave the building. In A&E Drive, he could see dense smoke rising from holes in the C-ring wall. People were dipping their shirts and rapidly accumulating water in the drive to sustain them in the search for survivors. Walls had collapsed. Debris lay everywhere. Fires still burned. Going back to the center court in search of the incident commander, he saw D. Lorenzo Clinic medical personnel conducting triage for the injured lying on the grass. Incident commander James Schwartz was already on the scene, but on the west side of the building near the crash site. Building management established direct liaison with them, with Charles McCormick, a building repair and alteration supervisor, standing outside where the plane hit, linked up with the command center, where he moved his command post to beneath the I-39-395 overpass near South Parking. The BOCC received a steady stream of calls from civilian and military officials inquiring about conditions in the building. For people who intended to remain in their offices, smoke, not fire, now posed a main threat. During his quick examination of the Pentagon between corridors 4 and 5, Carter had gained a good idea of the extent of damage and locations of heavy smoke concentrations. Back in the BOCC, he had Greenwell bring up Mentasys, a computer software program for monitoring and controlling utility systems. Contractors had not yet completed its installation as part of the Wedge 1 renovation, but it operated sufficiently to permit manipulation of components of the ventilation system. Greenwell and the contractor, Chad Henson, could not connect to Mentasys from the computers in the BOCC, but they were in radio contact with workers in the control group, a section of the building management office elsewhere with access to Mentasys through their computers. Carter asked them to shut down air handlers, air conditioning, and heating system components that blew air through the ductwork in corridors 3, 4, 5, and 6, and set up barriers in corridors 1, 2, 7, and 8. When Arlington County Fire Department Battalion Chief Dale Smith arrived in the center court sometime before 10:15 a.m. and established an auxiliary command post, he thought the entire building had been evacuated. He relayed an order from the incident commander to close down all air handlers, not knowing that Donald Rumsfeld and many others in command centers intended to remain in the building. Carter informed Smith of the critical work by building maintenance personnel to keep essential elements functioning. An officer from the NMCC also impressed on fire officials the importance of continuing operation of that center. The incident commander and subordinates later directed the manipulation of the air handlers to reduce the amount of smoke in certain underground sections of the Pentagon. As the morning wore on, dense smoke that wrapped around the building thwarted efforts to bring fresh air into the structure until wind shifts temporarily flew away the fumes. Control group crews and contractors operated the ventilation system all day and into the night to ease the task of the firefighters. Despite their persistent efforts, smoke and soot permeated the building, as well as jet fuel, the smell of death. When I interviewed James Schwartz, he said there was a multitude of various smells throughout the building because you had burnt body corpses and severed corpses. And then you had gas and jet fuel. Then you had electricity running through the water at certain parts of the Pentagon. That's why they had to shut down the electrical component to Wedge 1. Around 10 a.m., within minutes of returning from this inspection of the impact site, and while focusing on the ventilation system, Carter received an urgent call from Donald Kearney, the manager of the heating and refrigeration plant, located just a few hundred yards from the Pentagon, asking him to send the mechanics immediately to basement tunnels near the destroyed areas to turn on valves that keep chilled water from gushing into burst pipes. Water normally flowed through the pipes and coils around the building to cool air and then return to the plant. Closing the valves would prevent the water from reaching broken pipes and hemorrhaging. Failure of air conditioning would cause large, sophisticated computer and communication systems to close down, leaving the nation's military headquarters without a means of command and control. Backup generators and portable air conditioners could be substituted in certain areas, but those alternate sources were not adequate under the existing extraordinary circumstances. To conserve water for firefighting and to decrease the pressure for the chilled system, Kearney also wanted valves closed on broken pipes carrying water from city lines. At the heating and refrigeration plant, Kearney and operations manager Brian McGuire noted that with alarm that the pressure in the chilled water system had fallen rapidly from 80 to 38 pounds per square inch. If the pressure reached 30, it could create cavities that would seriously damage pumps. As the pressure continued to drop, Kearney ordered engineers to shut down the chillers, pumps, condensers, and other subsystems, effectively closing down the cooling plant, not to be restarted until the maintenance crews of the Pentagon stopped the massive loss of water from the broken pipes there. While Carter was turning off valves, he learned of the warning of another hijacked airliner flying toward Washington and heard the Pentagon police and the Senate court ordering an evacuation. Some of the mechanical and electrical crews communicated by radio and split into two teams. One went to South Parking, the other went to North Parking. The plane crashed into the building, or at least one of the crews would survive and return to help minimize damage. Carter and a few workers, including electrician Daniel Murphy and maintenance inspector Dennis Smith, stayed behind and waded through the water in the dark, smoky tunnels to turn off valves on broken water and steam pipes, taking care not to touch red fire valves that control water flow to the ceiling sprinklers. Some workers returned to the center court around 10:30 a.m. with only minutes left before the anticipated follow-up on plane attack. 6 men and Catherine Greenwell divided into 2 groups and walked to 2 different areas of the center court, increasing the odds that some of them would survive another air attack. An eerie silence fell over the court as Carter, Murphy, Smith, Greenwell, and Robert Candido, David Brown, and Anthony Freeman waited for the plane. Firefighters and others have remained there as well. After receiving the all-clear notification, maintenance crews resumed their work to save the building. Word of the supposed inbound aircraft was late in reaching the heating and refrigeration plant, so that operators continued to monitor systems, waiting for the water pressure to rise before restarting the cooling plant. Once it rose sufficiently, everyone had to be ready to evacuate all plant components in precise sequence. Nothing could go wrong, especially in the condenser system that pulled water from the Potomac River and put it through several filtering screens. Everyone knew the chilled water was indispensable to keeping the Pentagon functioning as a command center. Once the pressure reached a normal level, Kearney gave the go-ahead to start the sequence to bring the plant back to life. The 10-minute process, ending about 10:30 a.m., permitted the cooling of the major computer and telephone systems. None of the critical components had to shut down. Still responding to the warning of a second attack, police arrived at the plant and ordered everyone into the nearby parking lot except McGuire, who volunteered to stay and monitored the stabilized systems. Kearney soon returned to the plant, but soon put coins in the vending machine for a couple of sodas and handing a drink to McGuire, asked about the terrorists. "You think they'll come back?" "Nah," replied McGuire. Shortly after the presumed threat ended, police allowed everyone to return to the plant to tackle restored chilled water to the Navy Annex building. Pentagon's electrical system also suffered critical damage. After the plane crashed, mangled live wires threatened to electrocute survivors, firefighters, and rescue workers. That's what I was talking about on the first floor, with the electrical systems with the water all on the first floor. Arcing from short circulated lines from rekindled fires sparked explosions of jet fuel vapors and damaged components of the electrical system throughout the entire building. Electrician Matthew Morris, just inside Corridor 6 of A&E Drive when the crash occurred, stood about 100 yards from the destroyed area. Running along the drive toward the impact site, he saw people climbing over the chain-link fence across the drive near Corridor 4. After helping to unlock the gate in the fence, he was appalled to see people emerging through the heavy smoke from the C4 electrical vault, which carried 13,800 volts of electricity. The vault's doors to the drive and its inner doors had all been blown open. Part of its ceiling caved in. Peering into the deep vault, Morris saw water on the floor and heard the transformers humming, even though they were twisted off their bases. He quickly went inside as more people were coming out and saw digital displays still operating and pulled disconnect switches to cut off all voltage. From the A&E Drive, Morris hurried through the building to the E-ring and outside to check on the temporary emergency power generator for Wedge 1 mounted on a trailer. He found it burning, which was right near Wedge 1. That's where the impact happened. The airplane had grazed it, igniting its hundreds of gallons of fuel. Fortunately, his coworker, John Robinson, had not been performing his weekly maintenance on the generator at the time of the crash. After the explosion, Robinson had run to A&E Drive, saw the injured emerging from the C-ring, found and drove a small utility vehicle to transport them to the De Laurento Clinic on the north parking area for evacuation. The police ordered Morris away from the building for his own safety and would not let him re-enter the west side. He kept in touch with the BOCC and Stephen Carter by radio. Shortly after impact, Morris's supervisor, William Thomas, ran to a vault in the basement and began to identify and pull levers to cut off the flow of electricity to the crash site. For the next few hours, he and electricians coordinated with fire officials through the BOCC to cut power to firefighting areas. An old wiring maze that carried electricity from other parts of the building complicated their search for survivors of power to some live wires arcing and sending out flashes of sparks. Computer servers still working for emergency battered operation uninterruptible power supply components also caused concern when part of the NMCC lost power. Workers set up generators. Voltage disconnections also caused the BOCC to lose some of its power. Then about 11:10 a.m., An electrician pulled the switch from wedge 1 that cut remaining power to the BOCC, causing it to lose computers and telephones. Earlier, it had lost its backup and electrical power when the plane hit the wedge's temporary emergency generator. After Greenwell left the center and headed up a flight of stairs to the smaller, less capable alternative, the BOCC, she spent her time between that site, the building management office at 2A 258, and the center court, mostly responding to telephone calls and passing messages. The air in the building worried managers, workers who remained in their offices, and first responders, fearful that carbon monoxide, cyanide, asbestos, lead from paint, and other toxins might be circulating. The building's industrial hygienist, Matthew Skorowski, quickly set up equipment to check levels of common gases. The Arlington County Fire Department tested for carbon monoxide in the NMCC. The Safety and Occupational Hazard Branch of the WHS called on contractors to remove water-soaked plaster and asbestos that fell from ceilings into furniture and floors. Within 24 hours, in addition to contractors, Army environmental specialists were testing air throughout the building. Penryn contractors continued to conduct routine air sampling, the results serving as cross-checks to other tests. Filters, coils, and grills were repeatedly changed or cleaned to improve air quality. The Labor Department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration assisted with matters involving asbestos and structural damage. The Environmental Protection Agency collected air, water, and debris samples and monitored conditions for first responders, Pentagon occupants, and residents in the surrounding community. Immediately after the plane hit, WHS Director Doc Cook, responsible for overall management of the building, hurried to the entrance closer to Rumsfeld's office to check the emergency security arrangements and evacuation procedures. During the day and into the evening, he did not leave the building, providing the secretary with information on casualties and the building's condition and security. In turn, he received reports from DPS Chief John Jester, Director of Real Estate and Facilities Paul Hasselbush, and the latter's deputy Ralph Newton. Hasselbush and Newton had responsibility for the building's maintenance and security. In accordance with their continuity of operations procedures, they moved to their alternate command post in the satellite office on Army-Navy Drive, beyond South Parking. The continuity plan remained fresh in the minds because a month earlier, a fire in the Pentagon had produced smoke that caused a partial building evacuation, prompting Hasselbush to direct his staff to update the directorate's emergency plans. There was a lot, as you could see, in that specific chapter about restoring the building that were key issues here. One was the coordination of state, local, and federal agencies working on different tasks that actually complemented one another. This wasn't the case in New York. It was the case in Pennsylvania and the Pentagon. Interestingly enough, only because when I spoke to the Incident Commander James Schwartz on the podcast of Dark and Dower, he basically said that it was Schwartz and FBI agent Chris Combs that actually, it was Chris Combs that went to the Oklahoma City bombing and met with several of the FBI agents there and spoke with fire departments there about how well they coordinated with one another. And instead of having this interagency fighting, which even happens at the local level and the state level, not just the federal level or the intelligence level, they actually coordinate with one another. And Combs found that to be quite productive. So he got along with James Schwartz at the Arlington County and said that he would like to work with the fire departments and the EMS and other emergency systems if there ever was an emergency at, say, the Pentagon. The Pentagon has always been a threat for terrorist activity. They get daily threat matrices every month. And the Pentagon, the World Trade Center, in the years prior to 9/11, had always been a threat for a terrorist operation. And it's not like these people didn't know, all right? These people knew. I mean, a year prior to the September 11 attacks, the Pentagon ran an operation called MASCAL, Mass Casualty Operations, in which they predicted a plane to crash into the center courtyard of the Pentagon a year prior to 9/11. So it makes you wonder, how they could be so caught off guard, but yet the intelligence was out there. And all for you fringe conspiracy theorists that don't believe in planes and hijackers, these are the questions you should be asking, not the ones that lead down to a dead end. All right, guys. Hey, listen, thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care of yourself